Beneath the Mask, Exposing Shelly Knotek. Viewer discretion is advised. 22 is a true crime podcast that delves into real-life crime stories, which often involve graphic descriptions, sensitive content, and strong language that may not be suitable for all audiences. We strive to present these cases with the utmost respect for the victims and their families. Please note that the content discussed may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. Additionally, all resources and information presented in this podcast are obtained from publicly available internet sources. Listener discretion is strongly advised, and we recommend that only mature audiences proceed with caution. If you are sensitive to such content, please consider watching another video. Stay safe and take care of your mental health. In this gripping episode, we peel back the layers of deceit, manipulation, and horror that surrounded one of the most sinister figures in recent true crime history, Shelly Knotek. Beneath the Mask, Exposing Shelly Knotek delves deep into the chilling story of a woman who terrorized her family and those who fell under her control, all while maintaining a facade of normalcy. Join us as we uncover the shocking details of Shelly Knotek's reign of terror, beginning with her manipulation and abuse of Loreno, a trusted friend who became the first of her victims. Discover how Shelly's sadistic behavior escalated with the murder of her own nephew, Shane Watson, who had the courage to document her crimes only to pay the ultimate price. We also explore the harrowing fate of Ron Woodworth, the last known victim of Shelly's cruelty, whose life was systematically destroyed under her roof. As the episode unfolds, we'll reveal the twisted dynamics of the Knotek household, where fear, control, and violence reign supreme. The episode takes you through the turning point when Shelly's daughters, Nikki, Sami, and Tori, bravely decided to expose their mother's horrific deeds, leading to her arrest and eventual imprisonment. We discuss the aftermath of these revelations, the media frenzy that ensued, and the lasting impact on the Knotek sisters as they worked to rebuild their lives. Finally, we reflect on the ongoing repercussions of Shelly's crimes, including her upcoming release from prison and the challenges her daughters continue to face in the shadow of their mother's evil. Beneath the Mask, Exposing Shelly Knotek is a powerful exploration of survival, the devastating effects of psychological and physical abuse, and the strength required to break free from a life of fear. This is an episode you won't want to miss, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide behind even the most ordinary of masks. Welcome to 22, and today, we're diving into a story so twisted, so chilling, that it forces us to confront the darkness lurking beneath the surface of ordinary life. A story of manipulation, control, and unimaginable cruelty hidden behind a mask of normalcy. Imagine, if you will, a charming small-town woman, a mother, a wife, a friend. To the outside world, she appears caring, even self-sacrificing, someone you could trust with your life, but behind closed doors, she's something else entirely. A master manipulator, a sadist who thrives on the suffering of others. This woman's name is Shelly Knotek, and her story is one that will leave you questioning how well you truly know the people around you. In today's episode, we're peeling back the layers of Shelly's seemingly ordinary life to reveal the horrors she inflicted on those closest to her, horrors that would go on for years, unchecked, until her own children finally broke free from her twisted grip and exposed her for the monster she truly was. We'll walk you through the dark corridors of the Knotek household, where friends and family were lured in by Shelly's charm, only to become victims of her relentless abuse. You'll hear about Loreno, a trusted friend who found herself ensnared in a web of torment, Shane Watson, a young man brave enough to document Shelly's crimes, only to become another victim, and Ron Woodworth, whose life was systematically dismantled piece by piece. But this isn't just a story about evil, it's also a story about survival, about the courage it takes to stand up against someone who has held power over you for so long. It's about the strength of the Knotek sisters, who despite enduring years of abuse, found the will to expose their mother and reclaim their lives. So prepare yourself for a journey into one of the most disturbing true crime cases you'll ever encounter. This is not just another story of crime, it's a story of unimaginable cruelty, the likes of which will haunt your thoughts long after you've finished listening. Now let's begin Beneath the Mask, Exposing Shelly Knotek. To truly understand the twisted tale of Shelly Knotek, we must start at the very beginning, at a time before the horror, before the manipulation, when Shelly was just another girl growing up in a small town. But as we'll soon discover, the seeds of darkness were sown early in her life, and those seeds would eventually blossom into a terrifying force that would wreak havoc on everyone who crossed her path. Shelly Knotek was born Shelly Ray Long on April 15, 1954, in the quiet town of Raymond, Washington. It was a place where everyone knew everyone else, a close-knit community nestled among the evergreen forests and rolling hills of the Pacific Northwest. To those who knew her as a child, Shelly might have seemed like any other girl, innocent, sweet, even charming at times. But as she grew older, the cracks in that facade began to show, revealing glimpses of the person she would become. Shelly's early life was marked by instability and hardship. Her mother, Sharon, was described as a beautiful but troubled woman who struggled with her own demons. She battled with mental health issues, and her relationships were often tumultuous. Shelly's father, Laid Long, was a stern man, distant and cold, with a strict and unforgiving demeanor. The Long household was far from a happy one, and Shelly's childhood was shaped by the dysfunction and chaos that surrounded her. From a young age, Shelly learned to navigate this turbulent environment by developing a keen sense of how to manipulate those around her. She was a child who craved attention, and she quickly discovered that she could get it by playing the victim. Whether it was feigning illness or exaggerating the difficulties she faced at home, Shelly became adept at bending the truth to suit her needs. This habit of deceit and manipulation would only grow stronger as she got older. But Shelly's desire for control wasn't limited to her interactions with her parents. Even as a child, she exhibited troubling behavior towards her peers. There are stories of Shelly bullying other children, of her using her charm to win people over, only to turn on them when they least expected it. She had a way of making others feel small, of asserting her dominance in subtle yet insidious ways. It was as if she derived a twisted pleasure from seeing others suffer, a trait that would define her actions in the years to come. As Shelly entered her teenage years, the darkness within her began to take on a more pronounced form. She became more manipulative, more cunning, and more willing to go to extreme lengths to get what she wanted. Her relationships were often fraught with drama and conflict, with Shelly always at the center of the chaos. She had a knack for turning people against each other, for creating rifts that only she could mend. And through it all, she maintained the outward appearance of the perfect daughter, the perfect friend, someone who was always ready to lend a helping hand, even as she plotted to use that hand to pull the rug out from under you. But it wasn't just her personal relationships that were marked by turmoil. Shelly's academic life was similarly erratic. Though she was intelligent and capable, she often struggled to apply herself, preferring instead to focus on the social aspects of school. She was known for being a mean girl, someone who thrived on gossip and drama, someone who could make or break a person's reputation with just a few well-placed words. And yet, despite her manipulative ways, Shelly always managed to stay under the radar, avoiding serious consequences for her actions. It was during these formative years that Shelly began to hone the skills that would later make her so dangerous. She learned how to charm and manipulate, how to lie convincingly, and how to keep her true nature hidden from those who might see through her facade. But most importantly, Shelly discovered the power she could wield over others, the power to control, to dominate, and to inflict pain. And as we'll see in the coming chapters, Shelly would use these skills to devastating effect, creating a web of lies and deceit that would entangle not just her victims, but her own family as well. What started as the survival tactics of a troubled child would evolve into something far more sinister, setting the stage for the horrors that were yet to come. So, who was Shelly Knotek? To some, she was a loving mother, a caring friend, a devoted wife. But to those who truly knew her, she was a master manipulator, a sadist who found pleasure in the pain of others. And as we continue to unravel her story, we'll see just how deep that darkness ran, and how many lives it would ultimately destroy. To fully grasp the horror of Shelly Knotek's actions, we must first understand the story of Kathy Loreno, the first of Shelly's known victims. Kathy's story is one of trust betrayed, of kindness met with unimaginable cruelty. It's a story that serves as a chilling testament to the depths of Shelly's depravity and the lengths to which she would go to exert control over those in her grasp. Kathy Loreno was, by all accounts, a kind-hearted and trusting woman. Born and raised in Washington, she was the kind of person who was always there to lend a helping hand, someone who valued family and friendship above all else. Kathy was known for her warm personality and her willingness to go out of her way to help others, traits that would ultimately make her a prime target for Shelly's manipulation. In the late 1980s, Kathy, then in her mid-30s, was facing a difficult period in her life. She was struggling to find stable employment and had recently left a tumultuous relationship. Seeking a fresh start, Kathy moved to the small town of Raymond, Washington, unaware that this decision would seal her fate. It was during this vulnerable time that Kathy crossed paths with Shelly Knotek, who was already well-practiced in the art of manipulation. Shelly presented herself as a sympathetic friend, offering Kathy a place to stay when she needed it most. To Kathy, who had always seen the good in people, this offer seemed like a lifeline, a chance to regain her footing and build a new life. But little did she know that Shelly's kindness was nothing more than a mask, hiding the true nature of the woman who would soon become her tormentor. At first, life with Shelly seemed relatively normal. Shelly was charming and accommodating, making Kathy feel welcomed and cared for. But as time passed, subtle shifts began to occur. Shelly's behavior, once warm and inviting, started to take on a more controlling tone. She began to criticize Kathy over minor things, chipping away at her self-esteem with a steady stream of passive-aggressive comments. Kathy, who was naturally non-confrontational, tried to brush off these remarks, attributing them to the stress of their living situation. She had no idea that these were the first steps in Shelly's calculated plan to break her spirit. Over time, Shelly's control over Kathy became more pronounced. What started as small criticisms evolved into full-blown verbal abuse. Shelly would berate Kathy for hours, accusing her of being lazy, worthless, and ungrateful. She used every opportunity to demean Kathy, making her feel like she was a burden, a sentiment that Kathy, with her already fragile self-esteem, began to internalize. Shelly's words were designed to make Kathy doubt herself, to make her believe that she deserved the treatment she was receiving. But Shelly's cruelty didn't stop at verbal abuse. She soon escalated to physical punishment, using violence as a tool to further dominate Kathy. It started with slaps and hair pulling, small acts of violence that Shelly would later dismiss as discipline or tough love. But these corrections quickly became more frequent and severe, leaving Kathy in a constant state of fear and confusion. Shelly's ability to switch between kindness and brutality left Kathy off balance, unsure of how to respond or defend herself. Kathy's isolation from the outside world became another weapon in Shelly's arsenal. Shelly cut off Kathy's contact with her family and friends, convincing her that they didn't care about her, that they were better off without her. Shelly manipulated Kathy's every move, controlling when she could eat, sleep, or leave the house. This isolation was key to Shelly's control. Without the support of loved ones, Kathy had no one to turn to, no one to validate her experiences or help her escape. As the abuse intensified, Kathy's health began to deteriorate. She lost weight, became pale and gaunt, and was often covered in bruises. Shelly, of course, had an explanation for everything. She told anyone who asked that Kathy was ill, that she was too fragile to work or socialize. Shelly would even accompany Kathy to doctor's appointments, ensuring that she could control the narrative and keep Kathy from speaking out about the abuse. To the outside world, Shelly was Kathy's devoted caregiver, always there to help, always concerned about her well-being. But behind closed doors, Shelly's care was anything but compassionate. One of the most disturbing aspects of Shelly's treatment of Kathy was the way she involved her own family in the abuse. Shelly's daughters, Nikki and Sami, witnessed their mother's cruelty firsthand, and they were often coerced into participating in the torment. Shelly would force the girls to assist with Kathy's punishments, making them complicit in the abuse and further cementing her control over both Kathy and her daughters. This twisted dynamic not only deepened Kathy's sense of helplessness but also warped the girls' understanding of right and wrong, normalizing the violence that permeated their home. The physical and psychological torture that Kathy endured under Shelly's roof reached its horrifying peak in 1994. By this time, Kathy was barely recognizable. She was frail, emaciated, and utterly broken. Shelly had stripped her of any semblance of autonomy, reducing her to a shell of the person she once was. It was in this weakened state that Kathy suffered one final fatal blow. On a cold day in July, after yet another brutal beating, Kathy succumbed to her injuries. Her death, though tragic, was not unexpected. Shelly had pushed her body and mind to their absolute limits. But instead of showing any remorse, Shelly saw Kathy's death as an inconvenience, something to be dealt with and quickly forgotten. Shelly immediately set about covering up the crime. She enlisted her husband, Dave Knotek, to help dispose of Kathy's body, instructing him to burn it in a makeshift cremation pit in their backyard. For hours, Dave stoked the fire, ensuring that Kathy's remains were reduced to ash. When the gruesome task was complete, Dave scattered the ashes at a remote location, effectively erasing any physical evidence of Kathy's existence. But even in death, Kathy's suffering was not over. Shelly, ever the manipulator, concocted a story to explain Kathy's sudden disappearance. She told friends and family that Kathy had run off with a new boyfriend, a story that was as implausible as it was cruel. Shelly even went so far as to forge letters and postcards from Kathy, furthering the lie and ensuring that no one would come looking for her. And for a time, it worked. Kathy Loreno simply vanished from the lives of those who cared about her, another victim of Shelly's twisted game. Kathy Loreno's story is a haunting reminder of the power of manipulation, of how one person's trust and kindness can be turned against them in the most horrifying of ways. Kathy's life was stolen from her, not in a single moment of violence, but through years of calculated abuse that slowly drained her of her will to live. And while Shelly Knotek may have succeeded in covering up her crimes for a time, the truth would eventually come to light, thanks to the courage of those who refused to let Kathy's story be forgotten. In the years that followed, the full extent of Shelly's cruelty would be revealed, and justice would finally be served for Kathy and the other victims who suffered at her hands. But as we move forward in our exploration of Shelly Knotek's dark legacy, it's important to remember Kathy not just as a victim, but as a person, a woman who, despite her struggles, deserved so much more than the fate she was dealt. So, as we continue to unravel the web of lies and deceit that Shelly Knotek wove, let us carry Kathy's memory with us, a beacon of light in the darkness, a reminder of the human cost of Shelly's monstrous actions. As we turn the page to the next chapter in this harrowing story, we encounter Shane Watson, Shelly Knotek's nephew, a young man whose life was tragically cut short by the very people who were supposed to protect him. Shane's story is one of innocence shattered, of trust betrayed in the most horrific way. It's a story that forces us to confront the darkest corners of human nature and the devastating impact of Shelly's relentless cruelty. Shane Watson entered the Knotek household at a young age, full of hope and the belief that he was coming to a place of safety and love. Born to Shelly's brother, Shane's early life had been fraught with instability, and when the opportunity arose to live with his Aunt Shelly, he thought he was finally getting a fresh start. But little did he know, the home that was supposed to offer him refuge would instead become a prison, one from which he would never escape. When Shane arrived at the Knotek home, he was still just a boy, eager to please and desperate for affection. Shelly, always the master manipulator, initially presented herself as a caring and attentive guardian. She showered Shane with affection, made him feel like part of the family, and in doing so, earned his trust. But as we've seen before, this was all part of Shelly's twisted game, a calculated move to ensure that Shane, like Kathy before him, would be completely under her control. As Shane settled into life at the Knotek home, the cracks in Shelly's facade began to show. The kindness and affection that had initially drawn him in quickly gave way to criticism, belittlement, and eventually outright abuse. Shelly's tactics were insidious. She used psychological manipulation to break Shane down, exploiting his insecurities and fears. She would isolate him from the other children, making him feel like an outsider in the very place that was supposed to be his sanctuary. But it wasn't just Shelly's words that cut deep. The physical abuse soon followed, as it always did with Shelly. She would find any excuse to punish Shane, often for the most minor of infractions. A messy room, a forgotten chore, these were all reasons for Shelly to unleash her fury. And when she did, it wasn't just Shane who suffered. Shelly would often involve her own daughters in the abuse, forcing them to participate or watch as she inflicted pain on their cousin. It was a cruel and calculated move, one that further isolated Shane and ensured that the other children were too terrified to defy her. Despite the constant abuse, Shane tried to hold on to hope. He formed a close bond with his cousin Nikki, who, like him, was trapped in Shelly's web of manipulation. Together, they dreamed of escaping the nightmare they were living in. They would talk about running away, about finding a place where they could be free from Shelly's control. But deep down, Shane knew that escaping Shelly was easier said than done. Her reach was long, and her control over them was absolute. By the time Shane reached his teenage years, the abuse had escalated to a terrifying level. Shelly's punishments became more severe, more sadistic. She would force Shane to do grueling physical labor around the property, often in the dead of night, with little to no food or rest. When he inevitably faltered under the strain, Shelly was quick to remind him that he was worthless, that no one would ever care about him. These relentless attacks on his self-worth left Shane broken, both physically and mentally. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Shane's story is the way Shelly began to see him as a threat. As Shane grew older, he became more aware of the abuse that Shelly was inflicting not just on him, but on others in the household. He began to quietly document the horrors he witnessed, taking photographs as evidence he hoped would one day bring Shelly to justice. Shane hid these photos in a teddy bear, a small act of defiance against his aunt's reign of terror. But even in his quiet resistance, Shane knew that if Shelly ever found out what he was doing, the consequences would be deadly. And then, in February 1995, the unthinkable happened. Shelly discovered Shane's secret. Whether it was through a slip of the tongue or a betrayal from someone he trusted, Shane's attempts to gather evidence were exposed. Shelly, now fully aware that Shane had the power to destroy the carefully constructed facade she had built, knew that she had to act. She couldn't afford to let Shane live, not with what he knew, not with the evidence he had collected. Shelly's paranoia reached new heights. She became obsessed with the idea that Shane would go to the authorities, that he would expose the truth about what was happening in the Knotek household. And so, she made a decision that would forever change the course of their lives. Shelly ordered Dave Knotek, her husband and Shane's uncle, to take care of the problem, a euphemism for murder, thinly veiled behind the guise of protection for their family. Dave, who had long been under Shelly's control, found himself at a crossroads. He was torn between his loyalty to Shelly and his growing sense of dread over what she was asking him to do. But in the end, as he had done so many times before, Dave gave in to Shelly's demands. On a cold February night, Dave Knotek took a .22 rifle and went to the pole building where Shane was sleeping. Without a word, without giving Shane a chance to defend himself, Dave shot him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Shane Watson was just 19 years old when his life was stolen from him, murdered by the very people who should have protected him. Dave Knotek, driven by fear and manipulation, became the instrument of Shane's demise, while Shelly orchestrated the entire tragedy from the shadows. In the days that followed, the Knoteks worked quickly to cover up their crime. Dave, as he had done before with Kathy Loreno, was tasked with disposing of Shane's body. He burned Shane's remains in a fire pit on their property, scattering the ashes at Washaway Beach, a grim echo of the fate that had befallen Kathy. To the outside world, Shane Watson simply disappeared. Shelly spun a story about Shane running away to Alaska, a place he had often talked about wanting to visit. She told anyone who asked that Shane had finally decided to leave the Knotek home in search of a new life, far away from the troubles that had plagued him. And for a time, the lie held. Shane's disappearance was just another in a series of tragic events that seemed to follow the Knoteks wherever they went. But Shane's story didn't end there. His memory lived on in the minds of those who loved him, in the hearts of the family members who never stopped searching for the truth. And in the end, it was that search for truth that would bring Shelly and Dave Knotek to justice. Years later, as the full extent of Shelly's crimes came to light, Shane's death would be a key piece of the puzzle, one that would finally expose the darkness that had festered within the Knotek household for so long. Shane Watson was more than just a victim. He was a young man with dreams and hopes, a person who deserved so much more than the fate that was forced upon him. His story is a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power, of what can happen when those who are meant to protect and nurture instead choose to control and destroy. Shane's life may have been cut short, but his legacy, the truth he sought to uncover, lives on, a testament to his courage in the face of unimaginable horror. Shane Watson's story is one that must never be forgotten. It's a story that demands justice, that calls out for us to remember the lives lost to Shelly Knotek's cruelty. And as we move forward in this exploration of the Knotek family's dark past, we must carry Shane's memory with us, a reminder of the human cost of Shelly's actions, and a symbol of the resilience and strength of those who seek the truth, no matter the cost. As the horrors of Shelly Knotek's twisted world continue to unfold, we come to the story of Ron Woodworth, a man who, like so many others, was drawn into the Knotek household under the guise of friendship and care, only to find himself ensnared in a nightmare of manipulation, abuse, and ultimately, death. Ron's story is one that is both heartbreaking and horrifying, a tale of a man who lost everything in the process of trying to find solace and support, only to be consumed by the very person who promised him help. Ron Woodworth was, by all accounts, a gentle soul. Born in 1947, Ron was a man of diverse interests, a lover of cats, a passionate Egyptologist, and someone who cherished his friendships deeply. But as life took its toll, Ron found himself increasingly isolated and vulnerable. After the death of his father and a painful breakup with his long-term partner, Gary Nielsen, Ron's world began to crumble. He lost his home, his sense of stability, and with it, his mental health began to deteriorate. It was in this fragile state that Ron crossed paths with Shelly Knotek, who, at first, seemed like a beacon of hope in his darkest days. Shelly met Ron through her work as a caseworker for the Olympic Area Agency on Aging. Ron, who was struggling with his own issues, became involved with Shelly after he tried to help an elderly woman who owned dozens of cats and was being evicted. Shelly quickly inserted herself into Ron's life, presenting herself as a caring friend who understood his struggles and was willing to help him get back on his feet. To Ron, who was desperate for connection and stability, Shelly appeared to be exactly what he needed, a savior in a time of crisis. But as we've seen before, Shelly's kindness was nothing more than a carefully crafted facade, a trap designed to lure in those she could control and manipulate. It wasn't long before Shelly began to exert her influence over Ron, drawing him deeper into her web of lies and deceit. She offered Ron a place to stay in her home, ostensibly as a gesture of goodwill to help him get back on his feet. But once Ron moved into the Knotek household, it became clear that Shelly's intentions were far from pure. At first, Ron was treated with the same false kindness that Shelly had used to ensnare Kathy Loreno and Shane Watson. She showered him with attention, made him feel welcome, and assured him that he was part of the family. But this was all part of Shelly's strategy, a way to gain Ron's trust and make him dependent on her. And as Ron's reliance on Shelly grew, so too did her control over every aspect of his life. Shelly's manipulation of Ron was insidious and relentless. She began by isolating him from his friends and family, ensuring that he had no support network outside of the Knotek household. She would intercept phone calls, monitor his mail, and even lie to his loved ones about his whereabouts, all to keep Ron firmly under her control. And as Ron's world shrank, Shelly's influence over him grew stronger, until she had complete dominion over his life. Ron, who had already been struggling with depression and anxiety, was soon subjected to the same psychological and physical abuse that had become Shelly's trademark. Shelly would belittle Ron constantly, attacking his self-esteem and breaking down his sense of self-worth. She would call him worthless, pathetic, and other cruel epithets, all designed to erode his confidence and make him feel like he was nothing without her. But the abuse didn't stop there. Shelly began to impose increasingly bizarre and humiliating punishments on Ron, forcing him to perform demeaning tasks around the house. She would make him sleep in tiny, uncomfortable spaces, such as a windowless storage area or even the firewood storage area, denying him the basic comforts of a bed and warmth. These conditions were not only physically punishing, but also psychologically devastating, reducing Ron to a state of abject despair. Shelly's cruelty knew no bounds. As Ron's mental and physical health deteriorated, Shelly found new ways to torment him. She began to restrict his access to food, often giving him just enough to keep him alive but not enough to sustain him. At times, she would force him to take unknown pills, claiming they were for his own good. These pills left Ron in a fog, further eroding his ability to resist Shelly's control. Shelly even weaponized Ron's love for his cats against him. Knowing how much Ron cherished his pets, she used them as leverage to keep him in line, threatening to harm them if he didn't do exactly as she said. This emotional manipulation was perhaps one of the most devastating aspects of Ron's ordeal, being forced to comply with his abuser's demands out of fear for the animals he loved so dearly. As the abuse continued, Ron became a shell of the man he once was. His vibrant personality was crushed under the weight of Shelly's relentless cruelty. He lost a significant amount of weight, his hair began to fall out, and his once bright eyes grew dull with hopelessness. But even as his body and spirit withered, Ron held on to a flicker of hope, a belief that somehow, someway, he might escape the nightmare that had become his life. Yet, Shelly's grip on Ron was unyielding. She kept him in a constant state of fear and submission, ensuring that he never had the strength or courage to leave. And as Ron's condition worsened, Shelly began to view him less as a person and more as a burden, a problem that needed to be dealt with in the same way she had dealt with Kathy Loreno and Shane Watson. By the time Ron was moved into the house of James Mac McClintock, a Pearl Harbor survivor and family friend, he was already a broken man. Shelly presented the move as an opportunity for Ron to have more space and to care for Mac, but in reality it was just another way for her to control him. Ron was forced to sleep in small, uncomfortable spaces even in Mac's house, spaces that no one with any sense of compassion would consider suitable for a human being. Despite all this, Ron continued to try and please Shelly, desperately clinging to the hope that if he just did everything she asked, the abuse would stop. But of course, it never did. Shelly's cruelty only escalated, and Ron's situation became increasingly dire. Shelly began to accuse Ron of heinous acts that he was too mentally and physically broken to even comprehend, let alone commit. She manipulated him into believing that he was responsible for Mac's death, that he was a murderer, and that the only way to atone for his crimes was to continue to submit to her every demand. This relentless psychological torment pushed Ron to the brink. He became so convinced of his own guilt, so certain that he was beyond redemption, that he stopped trying to escape. He accepted his fate, believing that he deserved the hell that Shelly had created for him. And in the end, it was this belief, this twisted, manipulated belief, that sealed his fate. In the summer of 2003, Ron Woodworth's suffering finally came to an end, but not in the way that he had hoped. After years of relentless abuse, Ron's body could no longer endure the torment that Shelly inflicted upon him. His feet were so badly damaged from the repeated beatings and burns that he could barely walk. His physical condition had deteriorated to the point where he was barely recognizable as the man he once was. On a quiet night in July, Ron's life was extinguished, snuffed out like a candle in the wind. The exact circumstances of his death remain shrouded in mystery, but what we do know is that Shelly, true to form, went to great lengths to cover up her crime. She instructed Dave to dispose of Ron's body, just as he had done with Kathy and Shane before him. This time, however, they didn't have the luxury of a secluded burn pit. Instead, they buried Ron's body on their property, hiding the evidence of their cruelty beneath the earth. To the outside world, Ron Woodworth simply vanished. Shelly claimed that he had decided to move on, to start a new life somewhere far away from Raymond, Washington. But the truth, as we now know, was far more sinister. Ron didn't leave on his own. He was taken from this world by the very person who had promised to help him, who had pretended to be his friend, his caregiver. But just as with Kathy and Shane, Ron's story didn't end with his death. The truth, though buried for a time, would eventually come to light, exposing the depths of Shelly Knotek's depravity for all the world to see. As the mounting suspicions around Shelly Knotek's horrifying actions reached their peak, the walls of deceit, manipulation, and terror she had meticulously constructed began to crumble. For years, Shelly had managed to keep the truth hidden, her reign of terror unnoticed by authorities, her lies carefully woven into a seemingly impenetrable web. But the threads of that web were beginning to unravel, and soon, the truth would no longer be contained. It was in the summer of 2003 that the facade of the Knotek household finally began to crack. Tori, Shelly's youngest daughter, had grown increasingly terrified as she witnessed the same patterns of abuse inflicted upon Ron Woodworth that had been directed at others before him. With the memories of Kathy Loreno and her cousin Shane Watson weighing heavily on her conscience, Tori made a decision that would change everything. She reached out to her sisters, Nikki and Sami, desperate to escape the nightmare her home had become. When Tori shared her fears and suspicions with Sami, it was the final push needed to bring years of secrets to light. Sami and Nikki, who had already suffered deeply under their mother's control, knew that they could no longer remain silent. The danger to Tori was too great. The sisters made a pact, swearing to protect each other and to seek justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. On August 6, 2003, with their hearts pounding and their nerves frayed, Nikki and Sami drove down to the Pacific County Sheriff's Office. It was the first time since Nikki had tried to report Kathy's death years earlier that they were ready to confront the authorities with everything they knew. This time, they wouldn't be dismissed. This time, they wouldn't be ignored. Deputy Jim Bergstrom, please, have a seat. Tell me what's been going on. Nikki and Sami poured out years of pent-up fear, guilt, and horror. They recounted the brutal details of Kathy Loreno's death, the disappearance of their cousin Shane, and the current torment of Ron Woodworth. Every word was a step closer to the truth, a step closer to justice. Nikki, we couldn't save Kathy, we couldn't save Shane, but we have to save Tori. Please, please don't let her suffer the same fate. Sami, we can't let our mother hurt anyone else. We can't keep living like this. Deputy Bergstrom, having heard enough to take the matter seriously, knew that immediate action was required. But even as the wheels of justice began to turn, the fear that Shelly Knotek might somehow evade the consequences of her actions lingered in the minds of her daughters. The next morning, as Tori anxiously awaited the arrival of the authorities, there was a knock on the door. Pacific County deputies, along with Child Protective Services, had come to remove her from the home, finally ending Shelly's decades-long grip of terror over her children. Deputy, Tori, we're here to help. You're coming with us. As Tori was led away from the house that had been her prison, Shelly's carefully constructed world began to collapse. In a state of panic, Shelly tried to reach Sami, hoping to manipulate her daughter into revealing what had led to the sudden intervention. But Sami, though torn by the emotions of years of abuse and the loyalty a child often feels towards their parent, knew it was time to sever that toxic bond. Meanwhile, Dave Knotek, Shelly's long-suffering husband, was finally cracking under the pressure of his own guilt and the relentless questioning by investigators. For years, Dave had been Shelly's silent accomplice, carrying out her orders, participating in her crimes, and burying his conscience beneath layers of fear and denial. But the truth, like the tide, could no longer be held back. Dave, I did it. I shot Shane. I burned his body. I scattered the ashes. I can't live with this anymore. Dave's confession was a bombshell, an admission of guilt that tied him directly to the murders of both Shane Watson and Kathy Loreno. But even as he confessed, Dave could not bring himself to turn on Shelly, the woman who had controlled him for so long. He remained steadfast in his twisted loyalty, refusing to testify against her. Shelly, always calculating, always manipulative, saw her options dwindling. The evidence was piling up, the stories were unraveling, and the full extent of her cruelty was being laid bare. Facing the very real possibility of spending the rest of her life in prison, Shelly sought a way to avoid a full trial, where every horrific detail of her crimes would be exposed to the world. Judge, Shelly Knotek, you are hereby sentenced to 22 years in prison for the charges of second-degree murder, manslaughter, and unlawful disposal of human remains. In a move that frustrated the families of her victims and the daughters she had so deeply scarred, Shelly entered an offered plea, accepting the punishment without admitting guilt. It was a cold, calculated decision, one last attempt to maintain control over her own narrative. As Shelly Knotek was led away in handcuffs, her reign of terror finally at an end, the small town of Raymond began to breathe a sigh of relief. But for Nikki, Sami, and Tori, the journey was far from over. The legal battle had ended, but the scars, both visible and invisible, would take a lifetime to heal. As the final chapters of Shelly Knotek's dark legacy were written, the scars she left behind remained etched deeply in the lives of those who survived her cruelty. With Shelly now behind bars, the story shifts from the harrowing accounts of abuse and murder to the long and arduous process of healing, a journey that continues to this day for the Knotek sisters and those who were touched by the nightmare that unfolded within the walls of the Knotek homes. In 2016, after serving less than half of his sentence, Dave Knotek was released from prison. Now a man in his 70s, Dave lives a life marked by remorse and reflection. Working long hours at a seafood processing plant on the Washington coast, he struggles with the physical toll that age and guilt have taken on his body. His health is failing, and yet he continues to labor, perhaps as a form of self-punishment, an attempt to atone for the unforgivable acts he committed under the influence of his wife. Dave's relationship with his daughters is a complex one, fraught with pain, love, and unresolved guilt. Tori and Sami, the youngest of the Knotek sisters, have chosen to maintain contact with their father, despite the horrific memories that linger between them. For Sami, the bond with her father is intertwined with a deep conflict. How do you reconcile the man who provided for you with the man who participated in such unimaginable cruelty? Sami: I still love my dad, but it's complicated. I try to see the good in him, but it's hard to forget what he did, what he was a part of. He was weak, and sometimes I hate him for that. But I also know he's broken, and I don't know, it's hard to explain. Nikki, however, has taken a different path. The memories of her father's role in the deaths of Kathy Loreno and Shane Watson are too painful to bear. For Nikki, cutting ties with Dave was necessary, a step toward reclaiming her life and shielding her own children from the darkness of their family's past. She hasn't seen him since his release and has no plans to ever do so. Yet she harbors no illusions about the impact her father's actions have had on her life. Nikki: I can't let him back into my life. I've moved on. I have my own family to think about now, and they don't need to know that kind of evil, even if it's their grandfather. I've told my older kids that their grandmother is in prison for something terrible, but the full story, I just can't. Not yet. As for Shelly Knotek, her release from prison looms on the horizon. Set to be released in 2022 at the age of 68, Shelly remains unrepentant, continuing to deny her guilt despite the overwhelming evidence against her. She claims that she misunderstood her offered plea, insisting that she never admitted to the crime she was accused of. To this day, Shelly Knotek has not received a single visit from her daughters during her incarceration, a silence that speaks volumes. Rumors of Shelly's battle with cancer have surfaced from within the prison walls, but these claims are met with skepticism by those who know her well. Sami, reflecting on her mother's capacity for deception, believes that even now, Shelly's manipulation continues, albeit from behind bars. The thought of her mother being released is a source of anxiety for the sisters, especially for Tori, who lived under Shelly's shadow for so long. Tori: I don't know what I'd do if she tried to contact me. Part of me still misses her, the mom I thought I had when I was little, but I know better now. She's not that person, and I can't let her back into my life. Despite everything, the bond between the Knotek sisters remains unbroken. The horrors they endured together have forged a connection that even Shelly's cruelty could not sever. Nikki, Sami, and Tori continue to support each other, gathering several times a year to share their lives and keep the wounds of the past from reopening. Though the road to healing is long and fraught with challenges, the sisters have made it their mission to move beyond the shadow of their mother's evil. For Nikki, motherhood has become a way to break the cycle of abuse, to ensure that her children grow up in a world filled with love and safety, values that Shelly Knotek could never understand. Nikki: I've made a promise to myself and to my kids that they'll never know the kind of fear I lived with. They deserve better, and I'm going to make sure they have it. Sami, too, has found strength in her new role as Tori's protector, helping her navigate life beyond the trauma they shared. Together, they've revisited the places tied to their darkest memories, not to relive the pain, but to reclaim those spaces, to find closure in the tears, the smiles, and the small steps forward. Sami, it's not easy, and I don't think it ever will be. But we have each other, and that's something our mother could never take away. We're sisters, we're family, and we're survivors. The epilogue of the Knotek story is one of resilience in the face of unimaginable evil, of finding light even in the darkest of times. While the past will always be a part of them, the Knotek sisters refuse to let it define their future. They've chosen to reclaim their lives, to stand together, and to move forward, victims no more, but warriors of their own destiny. Thank you for joining us on this intense and deeply emotional journey through the story of Shelly Knotek in today's episode of Beneath the Mask, Exposing Shelly Knotek. We hope that this episode not only shed light on the unimaginable cruelty that can hide behind a facade, but also highlighted the incredible resilience of those who survived it. If you found this episode compelling, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Your support helps us reach more listeners who might find these stories as impactful as you do. And for those of you who want to dive deeper, we invite you to join our Patreon community. As a patron, you'll gain access to exclusive resources, including the detailed script of this episode, behind-the-scenes content, and more. If you appreciated the images featured in this podcast, you can also purchase them through our Patreon store. Your contributions help us continue to bring you more episodes like this one. In researching this case, we read the book If You Tell, A True Story of Murder, Family Secrets, and the Unbreakable Bond of Sisterhood by Greg Olson, a powerful account that delves even further into the harrowing story of the Knotek sisters. We've provided an Amazon affiliate link to the book in the episode description. It won't cost you anything extra, but it will help support our podcast as we continue to produce more episodes. Thank you once again for listening and for being part of our community. Your support means the world to us. We look forward to bringing you more gripping true crime stories in future episodes. Until next time, stay safe and keep questioning the world around you.